there is a lot of customization to do with DSpace. When it's installed, it does the minimal, and most of the functions have to be enabled. So I'm going to try my best to cover a very broad field in a short space of time. I tried to do some screen sharing with the software, but it doesn't seem to work with my computer and my version of Ubuntu software. So if you need me to do a video or more in depth about something, please type in the chat bar or let Inna and Nation know about it. Okay, so I'll begin with the presentation. It's on the first slide. Okay, the first thing to become aware of when doing customization is, how can I explain it, is risk management. The customization can get very technical, and if you build, especially on the web design part, and if you build a really good looking site that has a lot of customization, you must remember that when you upgrade to the latest version of DSpace, you will lose that customization. And that's the way that DSpace unfortunately is written at the moment. If you do heavy customization, you have to do it with the upgrade, because components, etc., in the framework and the structure of DSpace changes between releases. So what you customized in the previous release is not necessarily going to work with the latest release. So this is a word of warning to those who are thinking of doing heavy customization, is to know that it will become very expensive to maintain the customization through release upgrades, and that the rule of thumb for customization, if you do not have a web designer and a web program available, is to make sure to keep the customization to the absolute minimum so that your customization survives through upgrades. So let me just quickly point out in the first paragraph, as I say, adequate resources must be provided to ensure continuity of the customization during system upgrades. Depending on the amount of customization, it can be very expensive. UCT's website, Open UCT, cost them R500,000, and apparently our digital library website cost us, I can't remember exactly the figure, but I think close to R150,000. And unfortunately in South Africa, with the exchange rate, we paid very dearly for services from overseas providers. So this slide is meant for people in Africa who don't have these expensive resources. So please keep your customization to the minimum. Next slide. Alright, the methodology, the big picture of customization with DSpace is, in DSpace they use what they call a module overlay method, which allows you to copy source code into what they call the modules folder, and then you modify that code in the modules folder and compile it, and you leave the source code pristine, you leave it clean. And this is the basis for most of the customization tasks. And if you're doing heavy code customization, it's also the basis for the heavy code customization. So if you're evaluating DSpace and you think you're going to do some very deep, how can I put it, advanced customization, you must become very familiar with this module overlay method. Okay, next slide. Okay, just a little bit technical detail about how I approach customization and the reason why I installed everything in the home directory. There is a best practice rule with system administration on Linux Unix systems, is that you never install something in a top level folder. You always install it as a subfolder of a top level folder. So when evaluating DSpace for the first time, I decided to use the home directory as the home folder for the DSpace installation. You will notice some installations they install in /DSpace, which is forbidden, but recommended by the DSpace community. Then some institutions with Windows servers install in totally different locations and everything. So I standardized with what I call the home directory, and so that in all my customization documentation, when I talk about $home, we're talking about home/DSpace. And this allowed me to write up the documentation in a simple manner. I didn't have to try to figure out all the different locations where DSpace can be installed. So I've standardized it, and using best practice from Unix and Linux system practices is to install it in home DSpace. So the $home in all the documentation just points to simply /home/DSpace. So that's what the home thing is. It's part of the standardization of documentation, standardization, and what is it? When you compliance with Unix, Linux best practice. Okay. Next one. Okay, when evaluating topics for the presentation, as I said, there are many customization tasks that can be done with DSpace after installation. So I've tried to prioritize them according to user-specific priorities, and when I talk about users, I'm talking about the public that is going to access the repository. So when I specified my priorities, I'm looking at priorities as per the user's perspective. Now, the high priority items, I feel, when we're looking at a user-centric approach, is to enable embargoes, because some researchers, of course, are not going to come on board with open access that easily, and we need to give them a mechanism to start to come on board with open access. So I think it's vital to enable embargoes and to become very familiar with how to manage the embargo system on the DSpace system. And when Ina sends the slides, if you click on that link, there'll be many details on how to enable the embargoes on DSpace 5.5. Then together with the embargoes is again looking at the user side. So we have the researcher side, and now we want to look at the public side, the other researchers that are going to collaborate in the public in general. We want to give them the opportunity to request a copy of an embargoed item. So in my opinion, request a copy is also a very critical function that you should enable, and with DSpace as soon as possible after installation. Just a note, we enabled it as soon as it came out with version 4, and there were issues with the language used in the form, the request to copy form, but that has now been modified and corrected in DSpace 5.5. And hopefully the language that's displayed there in the request to copy form is much more friendlier. So if you're on DSpace 4X, it's highly recommended that you upgrade to DSpace 5X so that you get all the benefits of the improvements to the request to copy form. Then the next very high priority item when we are concentrating from a user-centric point of view is to simplify the submissions. My experience with working with the Makerere University repository in Uganda with the manager there, I can't remember his name now, sorry. He decided that to encourage researchers who are basically sitting on the fence, and to lower the barrier to submission is to create a simple submission collection. So for each, in there they have schools, they don't call it faculties of, they call it schools of. So for each school of, inside that community, he created a collection which he called a simple submission, and then we defined an input form specifically for those collections, which you can do. You can map a collection to submission form, and that all those details there are in the, if you click on that link, how to do that. And so for all those schools, we created a very simple submission form. Basically, all we required in the simple submission form was a title, the author's name, and an embargo if required, and that's it. The rest of the and of course then to upload the bitstream, but then the rest is taken care of by librarians, or I don't know what they do now, if they have any dedicated personnel working on the repository. But the rest of the submission then is taken over, and the rest of the metadata, abstract, etc., and review is then done down the line. So it provides a very convenient, simple service for researchers who are still wary of open access. Then another fairly critical feature, if we're looking at a user-centric point of view, is remote submissions. And what I mean by remote submissions is it's not a human submission. It's a submission made machine to machine, or basically web to web. For example, with our repository Sun Scholar, using the SWORD interface, and the SWORD is an acronym for Simple Web Offering for Remote Deposit. So we use the SWORD interface to allow who's those people, Biomed, to deposit automatically any article authored by them, and deposit it automatically into collection, and that collection then is curated by our scholarship office. So the remote submission is very important for interoperability with external systems that want to deposit items automatically. So for example, if you have a researcher information system, and the researcher is required to submit to that system, but you would like a copy to be archived in your repository, then you would use the SWORD interface to integrate with that research information system. And lately, I'm not sure if I'm going to talk about this later in a further slide, but DSpace with versions 4 and now 5 have released what we call a Web Application Programming Interface, or Web API, and it has become basically the de facto methodology of web-to-web communications now, is using a Web API. So perhaps the SWORD protocol, which is very proprietary, not used by very many people, and it's not a common web-to-web communications methodology, that might be retired, and so remote submissions hopefully will be done via the Web API. But that functionality, whether it is done via the SWORD interface or the Web API interface, is still a very critical functionality, and should be looked at carefully after the installation of DSpace. And then, of course, if we are thinking of a user-centric point of view of customization, the language of the user is very important. So your local community, you should try to make sure that if your local community is Spanish or French or Japanese, that you enable the correct language in DSpace. Now, with the XML user interface, there are many languages available that are already what can I say, pre-translated and prepared. Just click on that link and you will get a list of them. So the most common European languages are available, the most common Asian languages are available. So please take a look at enabling language, and also make sure that you enable the environment to handle funny non-Latin characters by using the UTF-H encoding, and please click on that link and make sure that your system is UTF-8 friendly. Okay, so those are what I feel are the high priority customization items when looking at a user-centric point of view. My experience when looking at it from a repository manager point of view, the repository manager wants to do the theme straight away. For me, that is simply not a high priority item. So please try to convince them to use this as a high priority list. The theme can be done later. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so the medium priority items, again, a user-centric point of view, is we want to be able to provide meaningful search and browse indexes for the users. Now, a word of warning, the search and browse index methodology and code has changed radically through several versions of DSpace, and eventually now with 5.5 all of the indexes are now delivered via what we call the Solar database. You have an option to still go back to that old PostgreSQL or Oracle database index hosting, but now by default it's all Solar database. And the search and browse index configuration used to be two separate items because of two different services, with the search indexes in Solar using Discovery, and in the browser indexes with PostgreSQL and using DSpace configuration. But now they've decided, the DSpace community, to merge the configuration and operation of the indexes into the Solar database, using the Solar database, and using what they call the discovery mechanism. So I suggest after installation, and especially on the development system, is to go and test the configuration of these indexes, upload some example data into your development system so that you can build some indexes, and then on the development system start configuring the discovery and browse indexes. Please don't do them on a production system. It's the way it's done is just definitely not ready for tinkering on a production system. Rather try and do as much of the customization of these indexes, because of the architectural changes, on a development system. Discovery is a bit of work to pick up and to customize. It uses a lot of XML file codes, so a word of warning there before you begin there. Alright, and then it's a great promotion tool to promote open access, which I don't think should need promoting, but it does, is to provide usage statistics to the researchers who have done submissions, and then to provide usage statistics to the general public. So again, the usage statistics also went through some serious architectural changes, but it's fairly stabilized now with 5.5. It uses again the same. It uses the Solar database, and there was the present usage statistics uses the Solar database, but there's also the Elastic search or Elastic statistics framework, which is also part of the DSpace now, but it's not well documented, not well used. Peter Dietz, I believe, submitted it, and I prefer that one when we look at usage statistics, because it gives you the top 10 downloads, and the usage statistics out of the box at the moment doesn't give you the top 10 downloads per collection, for example, which is very handy. And it also doesn't even show, when the downloads doesn't show clickable links. So it's very basic, but it's still very useful. There are service providers out there that provide better usage statistics as an add-on, but I believe that DSpace should really put some work into this to make the statistics clickable, or to standardize on a de facto framework like Elastic, instead of building a custom framework, which they have. Anyway, that's the heads up when it comes to statistics. Alright, also with looking at a user-centric point of view, media filters, what are we talking about there? We're talking about extracting text from the PDF submitted, so that you can do a full text search. Very important, full text search, and very important for if you enable the related item feature with DSpace, so that if a researcher or a member of the public is viewing an item, then if the media filters and the full text has been extracted correctly, and if the metadata with subjects is correct, then you get a nice related items list underneath that item. So it helps for what do they call it, lucky discovery of information, and what do they call it, serendipitous discovery. That's the fancy English word, but it just enables lucky discovery of information you wouldn't otherwise have found normally. The other thing the media filter does is, lately with DSpace 5.5, is to create a nice thumbnail using a standardized software package called Image Magic. So whenever DSpace needs to list items on the website, it gives you a nice thumbnail of the item on the left hand side, the way I've done it. It's a very nice aesthetic feature for users to be able to see that there's actually a document behind this item that can be downloaded freely, and the thumbnail is a nice call to action or prompt for that. Now my priority changes slightly here when it comes to web analytics. This is now a critical feature for repository managers, and is something they definitely must look at when customizing DSpace. And specifically with web analytics for the repository manager, you want to look at sitemaps, which enables Google to easily search and index all the items in your repository with a working sitemap. The other feature there you want to look at is the robots.txt file, so that you eliminate robots viewing, and so that you get accurate view statistics, and you eliminate all the search robots from Bing and Google and all other search engines. And in addition to the web side, is then also the research article metrics. You want to try to enable alt metrics, which is now available with DSpace 5.5, and not yet integrated well with the Mirage 2 theme. It is integrated with the Mirage 1 theme in DSpace 5.5, but not very well with the Mirage 2 theme. We tried to enable alt metrics, but I don't have the code skills to make the result from alt metrics display on the item view page, and hopefully that's something they'll fix with the Mirage 2 theme. What else is there with the web analytics? Also with web analytics, this is where we start to talk about interoperability of DSpace. So you want to make sure that you've got your website registered with all the harvesters out there, so that they know that there's content there that can be harvested from your repository. It also helps greatly if you get all the web analytics correct with your ranking of the repository. So this is web analytics from a repository manager's point of view. Also, from the next one, the theme. This is the repository manager's point of view. Is to theme the website. There are two user interfaces: the JSP user interface and the XML user interface. The XML user interface uses the latest Web 2 technologies like Bootstrap, etc. And it is the interface we chose because you can theme collections individually, or even communities. Each community can have its own theme. So we chose XML user interface for that ability to theme collections and communities, and the fact that it used what we'd call de facto Web 2 programming design technologies like CSS, Bootstrap, JavaScript, etc. But that still doesn't mean that when you're doing your theming, you should preferably try to hire a web designer, professional web designer or web programmer to help you do the theme. And please remember my first slide. Do not customize a theme too much, because this will change during the upgrades. If they change something with the XML user interface and its architecture, your theme changes won't be able to be upgraded and passed through to the upgrade. Okay, then licenses, very important for those who for those people in the regions where the IP technology is, or the IP legal framework is very strict, is to enable licenses. We didn't enable the what do they call them, the CC licenses, but I will be adding documentation on how to add CC licenses when I do that. But the feature to use CC licenses is available with the XML user interface. I'm not sure with the JSP user interface, But we have modified our default license, and we had it reviewed, our default submission licenses, by our legal office here at the university. So our default submission license has been legally approved by our legal department. And I suggest that you do the same with your institution. Is have a look at your default license and make sure that it has got the correct wording for your institution and doesn't include things that it shouldn't and doesn't exclude something that it shouldn't. Okay, so that completes the medium priority items, and now we'll just go to the low priority items now. Okay, these are mostly your repository will work quite fine, and it will do what it's required without doing any of this, but this is a nice way to clean up the customization to make sure you got everything done. You've done all the dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. Okay, so the first thing is to look at digital object checksums, that functionality. This is to do with digital curation and digital authenticity, to make sure that the object submitted is the object downloaded later on, the same digital object. I found that the configuration with DSpace with my database, if I kept the default configuration, that my data space size grew radically. So I've cut down radically on the digital object checksum history. I think I only do a history for 2 weeks and 1 year, which is fine for me. I'm happy with that. I believe that the people that are managing the repository now do not change bit streams. So a lot of my faith is in them, and that they don't change bit streams. But this is something, the authenticity and integrity of the bit streams is something I believe that DSpace should give more attention to, because future researchers are obviously going to ask the question that in this digital age, when it was so easy to modify bit streams, how certain are they that they actually got the bit stream that the researcher submitted? So that's a good question to ask, especially when you look at future researchers. The other thing, digital object identifiers, the main one with DSpace that you want to enable is the handle server, and that handle server I think I've dealt with in a previous presentation, and I've done a video of how to enable a handle server. In addition, with DSpace 5, you're now able to use a digital object service provider, something like DataSite or several of those. If you click on that link, there's information on how to set that up. We aren't using our repository for data yet, but we have upgraded the server to about a 5 terabyte disk space. So we have the disk space and capacity to host the data. It's just the willingness and the other personnel resources that are required. And I'm assuming that once I'm asked to enable or to assist with the implementation of data management, research data management on our Sun Scholar system, I will probably be asked to enable one of those digital object identifier service provider plugins, and then when I do that, I will update the wiki documentation. Alright, the next item, well, this is for a user-centric and repository manager, I suppose, is to make the emails personal. So what we did is we added in the header and footer of our emails, we've added details of how to contact our digital scholarship office, so that the emails sent and received via DSpace aren't these generic emails and don't confuse researchers and the public when they receive an email. And so it's fairly clear from whom the email originated and for what purpose. So I suggest doing the same thing with your email templates, and to do that, just click on that link and there's details on there. This feature, the open search feature, comes with DSpace. I haven't seen it used very much, or I haven't seen it in the documentation, but DSpace allows you to enable, has an interface, the open search interface, and again, just click on that link and hopefully there's more details on that. The open search interface is probably useful if you have an integrated discovery service like ViewFind, or can't think of any proprietary systems at the moment. So you would point your integrated discovery system at that open search interface, and then tell it to use the open search interface. Okay. Well, there's not much more I can say about it. The word says it. Then not much attention I see in the literature or the documentation is given to RSS feeds, which RSS stands for really simple syndication feed. For each collection and each community, I think there is a feed. There are RSS feed links in the bottom right in the options menu, and I think it's a good idea to look at that configuration and then try to promote it with your users, the RSS feeds, and that way they can keep up to date, or they get notified automatically of any new submissions to a collection that they subscribe to. A very handy feature, and something very worthwhile looking at and customizing. Okay, so that's the low priority items. Not super critical, but very useful. Alright, the next slide. Hello?
I think that's the end of your presentation.
Are you sure? There's no conclusion?
No. You'll have to make it up.
Well, maybe I meant to put it up.
No.
Okay, alright, thanks very much. And that ends the presentation. And I'll hand over to Erna and Nathan. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Hilton. And thanks a lot, Nathan, for typing in the chat. Some more recommendations. So now it's time for questions. Please use the text chat to type them in, and we'll be happy to answer them. Perhaps you had some issues when you tried to customize this way, and you would like to get some clarification. And this webinar is our last one in a joint series of webinars of Institute of Development Studies, Stellenbosch University and EIFL. And we'll try to summarize what we've discussed in this series, and we'll probably follow up with you what was useful, whether you made any changes to your DSpace repository, and what else can we talk about if we continue those webinars. So there is a question from Gary. Hilton, did you say that the stored API is being deprecated in favor of another web API, or did I misunderstand? Thanks. Could you please answer that, Hilton? Yeah, I don't know if you also had those issues with the sound. Maybe it's better to type your answer, Hilton. Sorry about sound issues. And we also plan one more webinar in the second half of June, and it will be with digital CSIC repository in Spain, which is a repository of Spanish Research Council. They will talk how they use altmetrics, and they've also introduced an open peer review model for their repository. So they will also talk about first experiences of encouraging post-publication peer review in the repository. Any other questions or comments? And thanks Hilton and Nathan for answering the third one. Anything else you'd like to ask Hilton and Nathan? Okay, I guess if there are no other questions, thanks a lot for being with us, and thanks again to Hilton and Nathan for speaking at so many webinars, and also for recording demos. That all was very, very useful. And I wish you a very good rest of your day today, and I'll be in touch with you via email with the slides and recording of this session. And if we plan any other webinars, I'll also let you know. Thanks again, and see you sometime later when we continue with this DSpace webinars. Bye.